Welcome to another episode of Cerebral Faith Live. I'm Evan Minton, and today, if you're listening to this on the Cerebral Faith podcast, I've decided to just go ahead and fuse the Cerebral Faith podcast with Cerebral Faith Live and not wait until next year because why not? There's no time like the present. Like the next season, I've talked about it here on Cerebral Faith Live before. I planned on doing live stream podcasts here on YouTube, and then sometime after the stream is over with, uploading it to Anchor, where it will be available as an audio podcast everywhere the podcast can be listened to, such as iTunes and Podbean, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and of course the Cerebral Faith podcast player, and a whole bunch of other areas. Anchor's really good at that. If you ever want to start a podcast, go to Anchor because it will just send it everywhere. But I thought, hey, there's no point in having two different podcasts with two different kinds of content. So, just fuse them. And I didn't do that for all of the episodes prior to this one because in all of those PowerPoint presentations that I did here on the channel, they were all that was all content I'd already covered on the audio only podcast, so it would have been very, very redundant. So if you're listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher, then that's great. And if you're tuning in live here on YouTube or watching this video later on playback, that's great too. But if you're wondering why, I bring this up because last week I said, hey, this is going to be the last episode of Cerebral Faith Live for the year, and here I am again. So I've sort of changed my mind, and here we are. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Tonight, we're going to be talking about eschatology, the doctrine of the last things. We're going to be talking about specifically are like most of the prophecies in Scripture, have they been fulfilled or not? And joining me now is my guest, Nick Peters of Deeper Waters Ministries. Nick, it's good to have you on the show.
Evan, it's always a joy to get to work with you and to be interacting with you. I treasure the friendship that we have together, and I'm glad for a chance to be here.
Yeah, I am too. Now, before we get into our discussion, what got you into studying the doctrine of the last things, or eschatology, as it's called?
Well, I became a Christian when I was 11 years old personally, and I grew up listening to a lot of Southern gospel music, and pretty much half of the songs in Southern gospel are about the rapture. And so generally I thought, this is what Christians believe. I attend Baptist churches where they talk about the rapture. Yeah, we all believe it. Then I got this thing called the internet and found out, wait, some Christians don't believe that. And I even found a friend there who was a Baptist minister who argued against that. And so I started having to look and think about this. And really, this was my C.S. Lewis moment of being drugged into the debate, kicking and screaming, the most reluctant convert, because I, as you can understand, would not want to give up that belief. But eventually I came to the conclusion that I couldn't hold to it biblically, and we'll get into that later, so I hope a lot of people aren't switching off their channels right now at this point. But I'd heard about this belief called Preterism, and from what I'd heard, it didn't sound good. I didn't want to go that way until I was at a theology web convention, and I talked with two people who did a group session on what preterism is. And it's the strangest thing when you actually talk to someone and really listen to them who holds a different view than you do. You can actually learn something about that view and learn that you've had it wrong for some time. And let's just say after I had that conversation, I was convinced of preterism.
Yeah, I remember the moment that I was not convinced, but like pretty much 80% of the way there. People who have heard me talk about my eschatological switch knows that I was just looking for a random book on eschatology because I thought, hey, it's a pretty interesting subject. And the book was called The Apocalypse Code by Hank Hanegraaff. He's a preterist. I picked it up. I read it, and I had never even heard of preterism. I didn't even know Hanegraaff was a preterist. Like I said, I'm just like I knew of Hanegraaff, and I was like, this looks like a pretty good book. I'll buy it. And I was reading it. I was like, what, what? I eventually I had to put it down for just a little while, and not finish it for a while. I had to space it out because I had to process all. It was like, as Tim Stratton would say, it was like drinking from a fire hose. So yeah.
I actually used to work
and
for Hank Hanegraaff at the Christian Research Institute as one of the researchers. And it was amusing because at the time I was a student at SES, which is very much pre-trib, pre-dispensational at the time. And so when I got there, they said to me, so do you have any doctrines, SES, that you're really tied to? I'm an Orthodox preterist. Okay, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, and what you said about like actually listening to people who hold to a different view than you do, that is so true. I want our audience to definitely take that to heart. Like, don't listen to what someone who disagrees with that view says. These people believe X. I mean, you can kind of do that if they like really heavily quote from people explaining their views, like, okay, here's John Calvin explaining Calvinism, or here's what James White has to say about unconditional election, or here's how William Lane Craig describes Molinism. And that's what I try to do, because I try to make sure that people understand that I'm representing it correctly by actually quoting the people when they're describing their view, rather than just using my own words, because for all they know, I'm attacking a straw man unless they go and check them out for themselves. But yeah, you want to get it from the horse's mouth. You don't want to just go off of like secondhand testimony.
And by the way, and it hasn't come up yet, but just in case people are wondering about my position and wondering if I'm a heretic or not, I do want to let everyone know that I do affirm the virgin birth.
Yes, and which I also affirm. I also affirm the virgin birth. So, how about you describe to our audience like what preterism is in like a few, in a nutshell, sort of like, and what is it and what is it not?
Okay. When I speak of preterism, I always speak of what I call orthodox preterism. Some people call my position partial preterism. And I think I've talked with you about this before even. And in this, they say full preterism is a belief that everything has already occurred, including the resurrection of everyone, the new heavens, the new earth, that kind of thing. Everything was fulfilled in 70 AD. I don't hold that position. In fact, I actually think it's a heretical position, because in the end, you really have to make a whole lot of problematic ideas with the resurrection of Jesus, because we are supposed to be raised like he was raised. And if our resurrection is just a spiritual resurrection, what does that say about his? But if you call my position partial preterism, then that's saying, oh, so you're just, partially a heretic. And I don't go for that. I call the other position neo-Hymenaeanism, out of a reference to someone in 2 Timothy who talked that the resurrection already taken place. So my view is orthodox preterism. It comes from a view meaning past fulfillment. Now, of course, when Jesus gives what's known in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 as the Olivet Discourse, at that time it was future fulfillment. But I contend, as do others, that what he was talking about was the destruction of a temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so there is a past fulfillment to it now. That doesn't mean Jesus is not going to return someday. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a mass resurrection someday of the righteous and wicked. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a new heavens and a new earth. It means Jesus has already come to take his throne, and Jesus is ruling as king right now.
Very good. So, what are some of the reasons to be a preterist? Let's talk about the Olivet Discourse. You just now brought it up. Matthew 24, Mark 13. What is the evidence that Matthew 24 was meant to be fulfilled by the end of the first century? First, how do we know that Jesus meant that these events would be fulfilled by the end of the first century? That's one thing. But secondly, is there biblical evidence that what Jesus predicted actually was fulfilled in history?
Okay. When we speak about Jesus, we all know that Jesus is, well, all Christians hold that Jesus is fully God, and Jesus is the Messiah, and Jesus is Lord. But we sometimes forget Jesus was also a prophet. That doesn't deny all the other titles. We need to put in he was a prophet, and he made a prophecy. And when we look in Matthew 24, which is the favorite one I like to go to, when his disciples comes and points out the beauty of the temple and all the buildings, and Jesus says, all these stones will be torn down, not one will be laying right upon another. We don't really understand, in an American perspective, how powerful a statement like that is. But imagine if someone came on your show here and said, before the year is over, the White House would be a pile of rubber. I mean, even if you thought they were crazy, if something like that happened, that meant something totally huge and dramatic had happened in America. And that doesn't depend on who's in the White House at all. Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. If the White House is in ruins, something bad has happened in America. And Jesus goes and he gives this long description of all these things, because the disciples ask, what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? No, they don't say the end of the world. They say the end of the age. And they're predicting the age of the Messiah coming. That's what they're thinking. But then they don't ask for signs of your return. They ask for signs of coming. You see, we read Jesus' return into this. But the disciples didn't even understand that Jesus was going to be crucified, really, let alone die. Yes, we know he told them this was going to happen, but they couldn't make any sense of it. Peter took him aside and tried to say, hey, dude, you got this wrong. It's not going to happen to you, okay? So they did not have a concept of him being crucified in Jerusalem and dying, let alone rising from the dead and then ascending to leave and come back later. So how could they be asking about his return when it wasn't in their minds at that time? No, they were asking about his coming. What do they mean? When are you going to be crowned king? When are you going to rule? And when you look at what Jesus says at the end, when you get to Matthew 24, and he's talking about the destruction of the temple, I think we can all agree the temple was destroyed in 70 AD in Jerusalem. But Jesus, he ends this and he says, some of these things must take place. No, that's not what he says. All of these things must take place before this generation passes. So either all of them took place, as he said, or we have a false prophecy from Jesus.
Yeah. That was one of the things that for some reason I never saw that. Hank Hanegraaff had to point that out to me, that he said this generation will not pass away before all these things occur. I was like, and another argument that I've heard that I found persuasive is that Jesus constantly uses the second person. You will see these things. You will see such and such. When you will see, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. You will see earthquakes and famines and all of these things.
You will be
one object.
dragged before kings
Yeah,
and
you will be
stuff like
dragged
that.
before kings. You will be, persecuted and so on. And it doesn't really make sense for him to be talking about some far off future generation saying you.
Yeah.
Brian Godawa, preterist novelist, he wrote an excellent series that's like, fills the void of not being able to enjoy Left Behind anymore, called Chronicles of the Apocalypse.
Yep.
He said in his book, End Times Bible Prophecy, It's Not What They Told You, something like, imagine a preacher were to say to you, uh, you know, if he was going to make some kind of huge prophecy, and he was saying you, but he really meant like someone in the year 3000 AD. You would think,
Yep.
why are you using the word you? Why don't you use the word they?
Yep.
And now the objection that I usually receive to this is that a lot of what Jesus says that's applicable for Christians today, he used the second person, like love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, and things like that. The problem, though, is that like those are commands for moral living. But this is a prophecy of what people will
Yeah.
see in response to a question that the people he's talking to, the disciples, asked. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison, if you ask me.
Yeah, and let's consider even other places where he speaks this way. When he's on trial in Matthew before Caiaphas, and Caiaphas asks him, "Are you the Son of the Blessed One?" He says, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand, coming on, seeing him, coming on with clouds of glory, sitting at the right hand of God." Now, this doesn't mean that Caiaphas is going to look out his window someday and see Jesus riding on like Goku's Nimbus cloud or something like that. But notice the you statement. He's saying, Caiaphas, you are going to see this. And what he's talking about is the destruction on Jerusalem. And when Jesus is going to be crucified, and the women are coming following him in Luke in the morning, he says to them, "Weep for yourselves," and he alludes to the coming destruction again. And right before Matthew 24, Matthew 23, you have Jesus lambasting the Pharisees. And so many times he said, "this generation," and he says, "all the blood from Abel to Zechariah will come on this generation." In Matthew 24, he gives a final use of this generation. It's odd to think all these times he makes prophecies about this generation, then it means something totally different when he gets to the great granddaddy of them all. And keep in mind, Matthew 24, if we were talking about the end of the world, he says things like, "flee to the mountains and pray it doesn't take place in a winter or Sabbath." I'm sorry, but if the world is coming to an end, what difference does it make if you go to the mountains or not?
Yeah, I remember Frank Turek talking about that when he was doing a tour in Israel, and he was like at the place where he was at some place, and he brought up that point. So I think Frank Turek doesn't really talk about eschatology much, but based on that comment, I think he might be a preterist like we are.
Maybe.
So those are like some pretty good clues that Jesus meant for his prophecy to be fulfilled. I also find the argument compelling that the signs leading up to it wouldn't really have been that impactful in any other era other than like the first century, like wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes. I mean, those have been going on for human history for thousands and thousands of years. You might as well talk about
political turbulence.
Yes, but as Brian Godawa points out, that there was a time of unprecedented peace in Rome called Pax Romana, and I always think of the Doctor Who character named Romana when I hear that term. But it was like really, really peaceful. And the idea of there being wars and rumors of wars, that would have been a very significant thing in that time, but it wouldn't have, especially if you're on the lookout for it for thousands of years. Like, okay, these are like very common occurrences.
Yeah, everyone seems to think their generation is the chosen one here. And no, that generation was already chosen. I mean, there's going to be a time, of course, when Jesus returns. But I think the main blessing you get from preterism, ultimately, is you realize Jesus is king right now. Psalm 110:1 is the most repeated Old Testament verse in the New Testament. For the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Jesus is sitting at the right hand of the Father now, and his enemies are being made a footstool for his feet. And as someone who can struggle a lot with anxiety, I have to keep this in mind regularly. That, we can easily say, Jesus is on the throne, but why do we do that? That doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like saying, like, Jesus is on his throne, but I've got this issue going on in my life right now. What that's saying really is, in this story, I am the major character, and Jesus is the minor character on the throne. We've got that backwards, and we all do that kind of thing sometimes. We all worry about things, and I have to remind myself, no, Jesus is Lord right now. I don't know how things are going to turn out. So what? I've never known how they're going to turn out before. That's the way it is. Preterism, though, tells me Jesus is king right now. Despite what people say, this isn't the devil's world where he's going around running amok. This is Jesus' world, and his kingdom is spreading.
Yeah. The watchers have been disinherited. Okay, so that's like the first half of my question. How do we know Jesus meant that these events would be fulfilled by the end of the first century? But is there any extra biblical evidence that shows that what he said, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and that these things occurred, like extra biblical, or in the the Book of Acts covers a good bit of history. So there's
Acts has some history. Like you see Agabus, the prophet, talking about a famine coming on the land. When Paul is in jail in Philippians in chapter 16, you hear about an earthquake that breaks all the chains and sets the prisoners free. Tacitus and Suetonius and other Roman historians write about troubles going on in the Roman Empire. But if you want to know about the history going on in Jerusalem at the time, it's Josephus who tells us the most about that in books like The Wars of the Jews, and how thoroughly destroyed Jerusalem was in this event. If you want to read about pure carnage and suffering taking place, read about the destruction of Jerusalem sometime. The Romans, they knew how to destroy a city, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about the rapture. What do preterists believe about the rapture?
Okay, when you want to talk about the event known as the rapture, you can go to 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15. And both of these have one big thing in common: a resurrection. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you look at the Olivet Discourse, there is no resurrection mentioned at all. It's not there. I mean, sorry, but I would think this would be a little bit of an important detail to talk about. Now, usually when we talk about the rapture, we talk about something that's going to happen before a tribulation period, and then before the rise of an antichrist, and all this other stuff. Preterists like myself say, no, that tribulation period came and went. And we also, there could be some disagreements on this, but I don't hold to a personal antichrist. I hold to antichrist. Several people, anyone who's opposed to Christ is antichrist. You're either for me or against me, as Jesus said. When you look at the book of Revelation, it's interesting. The word antichrist is never once used in the book of Revelation. Instead, the beast is referred to. And who is more of a beast at that time in Roman history than Emperor Nero? And so we hold that I hold at least that Nero was the beast. So when we talk about the rapture in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15, say, do you believe that that event is going to occur when Jesus returns and raises the righteous and the wicked bodily? Absolutely. Definitely 100%. Is that going to occur before a tribulation period where everyone gets suddenly swept away like I don't know, like an episode of Star Trek or something? No. No, when Jesus returns, he is coming back, and it is going to be the marriage of heaven and earth with Jesus ruling. I mean, even look at the book of Revelation, where it talks in Revelation 21 about how all the people go up to heaven, and no, correction again. Heaven comes down to earth. It is the marriage of heaven and earth. The Bible is a love story from beginning to end. It's all about a marriage. And this time, heaven and earth become one.
Yeah, you kind of and skipped ahead and anticipated my next my next question about who the Beast of Revelation
Yeah,
is. You said it was Nero.
Nero.
Before
Yeah,
I get to that, though, I want to make one comment about the resurrection. I think I agree with like R.C. Sproul that we will kind of be sucked up into the air to meet the Lord, but it's not gonna be like for the purpose of protecting us from 7 years of hell on earth. It's not gonna be we're not gonna be gone for a while. It's basically just to meet Jesus as he re-enters this space-time realm.
I would have no problem with that.
He compared it to like when a king of a city or something would go off and he would win a war. When he came back, like all of the people of the city would come to the entrance and meet him as he triumphantly came in on his
Mhm.
horse, and that's sort of the imagery that Paul has is in First Thessalonians 4. So yeah, I believe in a rapture. I just don't think I just don't get all the dispensational bells and whistles
Yeah,
attached to it.
yeah. So let's talk about the beast
Yeah.
then. Okay. Now, keep in mind, there are terms used in the Bible: beast, man of lawlessness, antichrist, and usually it's assumed all of these people are the same person. Now, that could be the case, but you need to make an argument for that instead of just assuming it. But in this case, we're talking about the beast, and probably some of the most famous numbers in the world, 666. I mean, I think I've shared pictures of Pokemon I've seen in Pokemon Go with a CP of 666 and said, hey, is this the Pikachu of a beast or something? But what does 666 mean? Where there was a gematria, it was this system that you would attach a numerical value to a letter. And we could picture that today if we were making a code. Maybe A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and so on. You could come up with a numerical value for someone's name. Where in Hebrew, if you took the words Nero Caesar, they equaled 666. Now, interestingly, we have some manuscripts of Revelation, I think 4, that say the number is 616, which is what Nero Caesar is in Latin. And I think that's an interesting image there. I'd also go a bit further. Let's talk about another figure in Revelation, the great harlot that shows up. Okay, who's the great harlot? I actually think the great harlot is Israel in that book. And you say, oh my gosh, that sounds so anti Semitic. Well, if that's the case, the entire Old Testament is anti Semitic because Israel is compared to a harlot numerous times in the Old Testament. And when I say Israel, I mean pretty much the ruling officials, the ones who crucified Jesus, the governing. I'm not talking about the average Jew walking down the street in Jerusalem. And at the start, Rome and Israel were gladly working together to persecute Christians. But then after some time, Rome decided, hey, why not go ahead and just persecute some Jews at the same time, too? And so that's exactly what they did. So what happens in Revelation? They turn on the harlot and start going after her as well. So that, I think, is what is going on.
Yeah. Um, What do you make of the beast having 7 heads and the woman sitting on like the beast?
Where 7 is always a number of completion and perfection, remember something being total there. And so when you see 7 heads, it often can refer to, complete rulership, complete control of a situation. It could refer to a number of kings, but what you want to get out of it is the idea of totality, that this guy is a total ruler of the Roman Empire at the time. And keep in mind, the Christian church was going against the most powerful empire the world had ever known. I mean, we could compare it to it if some strange ragtag religious movement was founded today and decided to take on America. That's exactly the way it would look. And yet, interestingly, today, we name our boys Peter and Paul, and we name our dogs Nero and Caesar. Oh, you were asking something about the woman as well?
Yeah.
Could you repeat that part
Yeah,
again?
what yeah, why is the woman said to sit on the beast? Is that like the cooperation thing you mentioned?
In our world, in America, we place a great emphasis on separation of church and state. This is really a very modern idea. Most societies, up until that time, and definitely back then, state and church were very closely tied together. I mean, when we look at the Inquisition in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just religious crimes, it was political. Because if you were going against the church, you were in many cases going against the state. You were guilty of treason. So politics and religion have usually been inseparable to some great extent. And this is true even in the Gospels when Jesus goes and announces the kingdom of God. I think even a non-Christian scholar like John Dominic Crossan has said Mark 1:1, where it talks about the story of Jesus, the Son of God, that could literally be translated as saying, "In your face, Caesar." Jesus was challenging Caesar. And one thing I would encourage Christians and non-Christians as well to really think about this fact of the historical Jesus is to ask this question: why was he crucified? I mean, as Christians, we'll say Jesus was crucified for the sins of the world. Okay, but that doesn't mean Pilate was sitting there thinking, how can I get Jesus up on that cross
Yeah,
for the sins of the
I
world?
want to interrupt here and just say that when I was a little kid, I asked my mom and I asked my pastor when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I asked that question. I asked that question over and over and over again, and I didn't get the answer I was looking for. I got the theological answer. I was like,
Yes,
yes, but why do these men hate him? Why do they
yes.
want him dead? That's
When,
what I was asking,
when
and
I
I
read
was
the book, when I read the book 5 Views of Historical Jesus, I got to John Dominic Crossan's, and he talks about how Jesus saw what happened to John the Baptist, who preached a fiery message, and he got beheaded. So he decided to tone his down to preach the love of all, the brotherhood of man, all this good stuff. And my end result problem with many of these Jesuses that non-Christians create, and even some Christians really, is this Jesus doesn't get crucified. This Jesus is Mr. Rogers. No one's getting threatened at all by this Jesus. No, Jesus was enough of a threat somehow to be crucified. I think it's something really worth pointing out. But yeah, for Woman on Beast, it's our mistake that we try to separate politics and religion. In many cases, you just cannot do that. They go hand in hand.
yeah. So this next question concerns a topic that's an in-house topic even among preterists.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to tell you what your take is on it. And why you hold the view that you do, and that is the millennium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of waver in between post-millennialism and all-millennialism. I find it so bizarre that we have this thing brought up in 3 verses in the Bible, and we seem to make everything about those 3 verses. But I think that in some ways the millennium is going on right now. It's not a literal 1,000 years. I'd be almost saying like how the psalm says he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Well, the cattle on that 1,001st hill, that's free game for everyone else to get. God doesn't own that one. You go up to 1,000, that's it. That's where his ownership ends. Of course, he's not saying that. If there's 10,000 hills, God owns all the cattle on them. So what's going on, I think, is that the rule of Christ is here right now. But if you read Matthew 13, where Jesus gives several parables about the kingdom, he gives two that are very interesting about this in relation to this. One is a mustard seed that grows, starting from a small seed and grows to become something that fills the earth, or a little bit of leaven going through a whole batch of dough. In other words, this is something that starts off small and keeps growing and growing and growing. But in a different eschatological viewpoint, it keeps growing, then it stops and it's taken out of the way, and then somehow it returns. No, there's no indication the kingdom stops growing. It keeps going on and on. And when Jesus makes his statement about Peter, I mean, we can keep debating and asking, was it a Catholic interpretation he had in mind or something like that? But here's something to keep in mind. Jesus said, whatever the church is, the gates of hell won't stand against it. Gates are defensive measures. The church is to be on the offensive, attacking the gates. The kingdom of God is supposed to be growing and spreading. You know, some people are, I've seen some people say, well, couldn't Jesus have done a better job of getting his message out there than he did? And I'm thinking, geez, that's comparative. We are now 2,000 years away. Most of us in America live thousands of years away from where the event happened, in a different culture, in a different language, and yet you've got about 2 billion people all over the world who are willing to bow the knee in defense of Jesus Christ and submit to him. I think that's a pretty good job.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, I mean, yeah, what you said about like those parables, those really convinced me of what was it? I know what I believe about the millennium, but I always get the labels confused. Is it post millennialism?
Post-millennial is like working to spread and then the millennium comes as a result of that. And all millennial is, it's not a literal 1,000 years, and premillennial is we're waiting for the millennium.
Okay, so yeah, that the parable of the mustard seed and the dough, the leaven, that really is I find that compelling, and it's like, yeah, like what you said. I mean, a lot of people just don't appreciate how tiny of a sect Christianity was, and now it's a worldwide religion. I mean, there's Christians in every nation, and not a lot of people don't really appreciate this, but Daniel 7 actually predicted this, that the Son of Man would be worshipped by people of every nation.
Yep.
So that there's fulfilled prophecy right there. That, you know, thousands of years, and they can't do the normal tactic that they do, like, you know, try to post date the prophecy after it happened. You know, you can't do that with this one.
Yeah.
So before I move on, well, let's we don't really have any questions per se, but we do have a couple of comments. Unfortunately, this looks like it might be one of the slow nights. But Slam RN, one of my patrons, says, "Hey Nick, I affirm the virgin birth."
I am pleased to hear that you affirm the virgin birth, which I also do affirm.
And I also affirm it. And here is Bible Facts saying Preterism is for the lazy Christians that don't want to spend time figuring out what Bible prophecies really mean.
Yeah, that's just a typical ad hominem kind of thing. And honestly, if you look at whole dispensationalist thing, it's more often usually just take them literally or rather literalistically. No, preterists have to do a whole lot of work in understanding the culture of the times and way prophecy was spoken. I mean, let's give some examples of Old Testament statements like this. In 2 Samuel 22, Okay, you have David giving a final song, as it were. He says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord. I called out to my God." I'm starting at verse 7 for anyone who's going to look us up. "From his temper," and keep in mind, there was no temper in Jerusalem at the time, "he heard my voice. My cry came to his ears. The earth trembled and quaked. The foundations of the heavens shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of its presence, bolts of lightning blazed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven, the voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of breath from his nostrils. Okay, now I've read through 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and somehow I've missed that event taking place where God comes flying out of heaven on the backs of, say, Gabriel and Michael, going green arrow style on the enemies of David. For some reason, I can't find where that takes place. Unless David is speaking as a prophet, where he speaks of political events in cosmic terms. And yes, Peter says David was a prophet. So this is what's going on. When something political happened, it was described in cosmic terms. In Isaiah 13, we read about the destruction of Babylon. It sounds like the end of the world, but it isn't. It's just talking about Babylon being destroyed. In Daniel 2, we read about a kingdom with a head of gold, and you keep going on from there until you get to the final kingdom. And during that one, there will be another kingdom built that no one will ever destroy. That's the kingdom of God at the very end. We have to do a lot of work to understand these prophecies. I think, in fact, it's more work than many dispensationalists have to do. And I don't say this to mock dispensationalists or anything. I have a great love for my dispensationalist brothers and sisters. But honestly, if I told people or anyone, I'd say, from that side of the camp, please do not listen to so-called prophecy experts. I've often joked that I wish I could be a prophecy expert. You can make a bunch of statements. You can be regarded as an expert. You can write a book about it. You can be a bestseller. You can publish videos. You can speak at conferences. You make a lot of money. Everything you say is proven wrong in a few years, and yet you're still somehow considered an expert, and you get to do the exact same thing over and over again. I mean, you know how many books are gathering dust shelves in the back stores of Christian bookstores because they predicted Saddam Hussein's the Antichrist, Osama bin Laden's the Antichrist. All these different people are the Antichrist. They were always wrong. How long are we going to be listening to these people? And before we realize that they need to be held accountable. I mean, John Hagee recently published that whole thing about blood moons, all about it.
Yeah.
Nothing.
I liked the way what JP Holding called it. He called it blood moon lunacy.
Yeah, nothing happened to that. You know, if we hold preachers accountable for, say, sexual sins and things of that sort, and for teaching heresy, and we should, if someone gets something this seriously wrong that leads the body of Christ astray, shouldn't we hold them accountable to, now, maybe not to the same extent as, say, having an adulterous affair, but we should at least be saying, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing this so much if you're going to get these things wrong that the world can readily see. Because if you tell me something, if I was a non-Christian and you told me something that I could see was wrong in 5 minutes worth of checking. And by the way, this applies to people who share things blindly on Facebook, by the way, too, or any other place. If you share something that I can see is false in 5 minutes of checking, why should I believe anything you say on the resurrection of Jesus that will take a whole lot more time to check?
Mm-hmm.
We need to hold our words accountable. I mean, there are some things every teacher is going to get wrong, but if you make a statement about the future and it doesn't happen like that, you need to be held accountable.
Yeah, that's something that uh that's something that that's been on my mind recently, about, a lot of different issues that are just so, I mean, statements even outside of the eschatology debate, like
Yeah.
statements, regarding so-called creation science, or
Hmm.
um statements that can just be, you just do a quick Google search and you find
Hmm.
out, oh, this is not just wrong, this is, very, very, very wrong.
Hmm.
And we we lose our credibility.
Yeah.
Um,
Let
they
me
they
say,
they think we're crazy, because if you they're gonna think you're crazy because you believe, like, not you, Nick, but
yeah.
some of you listening. The Earth is 6,000 years old. Dinosaurs lived with human beings, and also the current president is the Antichrist, and all these kooky eschatological conspiracy theories. They're not going to listen to you when you say a man rose from the dead. You're going to lose your credibility, and you're going to lose a convert. And unfortunately, like, when that person comes and talks to someone like Nick or I, they're probably going to think, oh, well, these other Christians held to these crazy things. You probably hold to them too.
Yeah. Let me say this. I mean, politically, I'm the one who's so conservative. I only fly on planes that have two right wings. I mean, that's the whole joke about it. So when Obama was president, I was thoroughly opposed to the things he was doing. But when I saw someone sharing misinformation about him, like if I get included in an email blast or something like that, I would hit reply all and say, here's what the truth is about this. This statement is false. And when someone share a story on Facebook about him that was false, I'd call him out and say, this is a false story. Don't share it. Now, why would I do such a thing here? Because if we want to take down our opponents, even, we need to do it in truth, not in error. If our opponents are in the wrong, they will show enough wrong that we don't need to misrepresent them. We don't want our opponents misrepresenting us, and they shouldn't. We don't need to misrepresent them. Always make sure even your enemies are referred to accurately.
Amen. So, moving on. Usually, when presented with the kind of evidence that you've presented here, futurists will say, futurists, people who believe that most of these prophecies are in our future, they'll say, yeah, okay, maybe these prophecies probably were fulfilled by the events of 70 AD. But you're overlooking the possibility of double fulfillment. I recently was in a Facebook discussion.
Mm.
I think it was maybe in the Capturing Christianity discussion group, or maybe it was the Christian Apologetic Support group. No, it was the Memes for Jesus posting Facebook group. There's a lot of hilarious memes in that group. But anyway, he said, oh, what about double fulfillment? And he pointed out um, a prophecy in Isaiah that was not actually about Jesus, but was concerning local events and time frames. This is what he said verbatim. He said, "quote: A virgin would have been gestured to as the one who would give birth, indicating that enough time would elapse for her to get married, has conceived, carried to term. But Mary's actual virgin birth of Jesus, which happened hundreds of years later, more completely fulfilled the phrase, 'the virgin will give birth.'" End quote. I gave a response in the Facebook comment of my own, but how would you respond to this person? Like, why can't it be both about the events of the first century, whether it be the Olivet Discourse or some passage in Revelation, and also about our future?
Yeah, where when we're looking at this prophecy about the virgin birth, which I do affirm, I've been doing a whole lot of reading some on the subject because I am planning on writing in the future an ebook on the virgin birth, which I do affirm. And there was an interesting book that deals with this kind of thing by Mark D. Schutzius. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I think it's the Hebrew word for sign and its impact on Isaiah 7:14. And he points out there are actually Christians on all sides here. There are some Christians who look at this passage and say it had a fulfillment in local times. That's it. There are some who say there is a dual fulfillment, and some say it was not a local fulfillment. Really, it's a purely future fulfillment. So let's not assume that every Christian out there holds to a dual fulfillment. I don't have a total side yet. That's why I'm researching it right now for a book, and I honestly think it'd be foolish for me to come out and state it right now, even if I did hold it. But could the same thing apply? One thing, this is usually the only one I find when people talk about a dual fulfillment. There are other passages where Jesus talks about something, and we can be pretty sure it's not what the original writer had in mind. For instance, Jesus says to the Pharisees that Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. I don't think Isaiah was thinking about the Pharisees, but that doesn't mean Jesus was wrong. He definitely wasn't. But Jesus is saying, just as the people were back then, you are being just like those people are today. And that was seen as a valid interpretation of it. And so what I think the problem here with this is this seems like an argument to save an interpretation that's not based on the data. But Jesus is referring to a one-time event, the destruction of a temple that the disciples are seeing right there. That is not going to be repeated again. It's pretty interesting that Julius the Apostate, one of the late 4th century Roman emperors, tried to rebuild a temple in order to disprove the prophecy of Daniel, and yet he died somehow before he was able to finish that. Imagine that. You gotta wonder what's going on. Right now, the Dome of the Rock has been built, even where that temple would be. So maybe this is God's just great big joke of saying, not gonna happen. Give it up. And yet today we have so many people rushing to build this temple because I don't know, some people are, it's just like I don't understand these people are trying to breed a red heifer. What does God need help fulfilling this prophecy or what?
Yeah. Now here's what I copy pasted the comment, and this was my response. I think your response is pretty good, but this is what I said in the Facebook comment. I said I'll grant that double fulfillment is possible, just as multiple meanings to get any given verse is possible, but without a good reason. This seems like an excuse to keep on enjoying your Left Behind novels. Some prophecies were only intended for one-time use. I mean, how many times is Babylon going to carry Israel into exile? What about Jesus' prediction that Peter would deny him 3 times? Does this also refer to a future man named Peter who will deny Jesus 3 times? Double fulfillment for eschatological prophecies is possible, sure, but possibilities are cheap.
Mm-hmm. And I have seen that your patron, Slam RN, here, who I believe stated that they do affirm the virgin birth, which I do affirm, has asked, is the word translated virgin meaning a young woman or what? I've heard argument about this word. Generally, I think it usually does refer to a young woman, but the book I referred to earlier does look a lot at that issue. I think it's pretty easy to state that this young woman in this passage was a virgin. But when you look at the New Testament translation, I think it's pretty clear Parthenos does refer to a virgin in that sense. So that would also be how a Septuagint translator saw it.
Yeah. So let's talk about hyper-preterism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, either of us are hyper-preterists. Well, I mean, I have ADHD, so sometimes I am a I am a hyper-preterist. In a different sense of the word.
Yeah.
But we like you said, we both believe the dead will be raised, and that Jesus is going to come back bodily in his human form. We're going to see him, and the dead are going to be raised bodily. The caskets are going to be emptied. The cremated are going to be, reassembled. Neither of us believes that every single last prophecy of Scripture has been fulfilled. We only believe, maybe most of them have been fulfilled. But what are some of the arguments for hyperpreterism, and how would you respond to them? One argument that I've heard in particular concerns 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 13 to 18. They argue, and they sort of use the same argument that I've heard, with regards to the Olivet Discourse. They say, well, look at what Paul says. He says, "We shall not all be asleep, but we will be changed." We, first person plural. And so they argue, well, Paul believed that, you know, he and his generation and his readers were going to partake in the resurrection. So this resurrection Paul's talking about can't be, 2000 plus years into the future. That's one argument I've heard.
Yeah, there are several books that have been. I think what's going on here is Paul is giving kind of like the editorial we. He doesn't know when it's going to take place, so he can't say they, because it could take place in his lifetime. He doesn't know. So he says we, which in this case is the safe word to use. He doesn't mean that all of us will be part of that. He just means any Christians. In this case, he's talking about what do Christians do? We mourn, but we don't mourn like those who have no hope. If he'd said they, then everyone would have said, oh, well, he knows that it's not going to happen in our lifetime. Paul didn't know. I think Paul was hoping it would happen in his lifetime, but he didn't know if it would or if it wouldn't. So he went the safe route with that one and just used the word we. So that's usually the kind of argument that you see. And hyper-preterism, or neo-Hymenaeanism, as I prefer to say it, it's never really gotten much of a following because it's really in many ways such a gloomy doctrine. And there, even some people who have held to it have come out of it. Sam Frost came out of neo-Hymenaeism, for example. And generally, I think the problem is it does spiritualize way too many things. I mean, are there some hard logistical questions you can ask about resurrection? Yes, and these were asked in church history. What happens if someone gets eaten by a cannibal? For instance, if you died in a volcanic eruption and your body was turned to ash, what would happen? And so those are questions that, I mean, for me, I think, yeah, the God who created the body originally has no problem creating the body again. So that can happen. But yeah, I just encourage people to go out and read the both sides on this issue. There's a few books you can find on Amazon that reply to the neo-Hymenaean error. Keith Matheson, for instance, has one. Yeah, there was some. I honestly, the name escapes me. Joe something. I honestly can't remember. He something like we shall all be changed or something like that. He wrote a great book and he actually sent me a copy of it, and it's got a lot of great things in it. Unfortunately, I'm having a mental blank right now of who it was.
Yeah. What was the name of the one by Keith Matheson?
Okay, it was when shall these things be?
Okay, and that's a refutation of hyperpreterism.
Yeah, a reformed response to it.
Yeah. So yeah, I responded to the 1 Thessalonians 4:1 in the same way that you did. And I also point out that Christians throughout the ages have spoken of the second coming and the resurrection using the first person plural. I mean, I use it all the time.
Yep.
Because for the very same reason, because it could happen in my lifetime. I might be walking down the street and we will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. When Jesus comes back, I'll be, something or other. That doesn't necessarily mean that I am teaching or proclaiming, yes, it's going to happen before Evan Minton passes away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've got Slamrn says, thanks. I'd forgotten about the Septuagint. Good answer. I always want to read that as LXX. Kent Peters asks, what is the root or beginning of the word preterism, and how far back? I affirm the virgin birth.
Yeah, and if anyone's wondering, yes, that's my dad who's watching and he's commenting here. I've talked to my parents sometimes about end times. I've had to calm down my sister when she's been panicky about this kind of thing before. The root of it is coming from a word, as I said at the start, that refers to past. Now, how far back? When did this word come about? I don't know. I'm not that expert on the Greek language or whatever it is for that one. On that one, I just know that it refers to a past fulfillment. And yes, I do still affirm the virgin birth.
And I also affirm the virgin birth. So that's the end of all the questions that I have prepared. If you have any of you watching, if you have any questions for Nick, leave them in the live chat, and we'll address them. We'll spend like maybe 10 more minutes, and then we'll go. But if you don't have any more, oh wait, there was one more. There was one more question that I had, and that was like for those who want. Obviously, we can't do justice to this topic in a
Definitely.
1-hour podcast. This is a very, very deep in the weeds kind of thing. We just like brushed the tip of the iceberg on like the Olivet Discourse, the Beast, the Millennium, all these different things. What kind of resources would you recommend, like books or papers or podcasts or whatever that go into preterism that our audience can check out for for them to like do a full in-depth investigation into this?
Yeah. Okay. One of the first books I recommend people to read is Gary DeMar's book, Last Days Madness. A very good one. Definitely the Brian Goddard one that you mentioned. It's Not What They Told You about prophecy. And Hank Hanegraaff's The Apocalypse Code is a good one. D.D. Warren has the book, It's Not the End of the World, which is entirely accurate. And you refer to J.P. Holding with Blood Moon's Lunacy. His whole site of tectonics.org. He's got some great material on preterism, including where he goes pretty much through the book of Revelation and gives an interpretation of the book. Some responses, I think, to neo-Hamaneianism in there. I saw my friend Chris Date liked when he saw that I was going to be on your show on this topic. He's done some good work on preterism as well. There's really so many great places to go to for this. There used to be the Preterist podcast that D.D. Warren had. I'm not sure if it's still up or not anymore. And I've written some stuff on my own blog at deeperwatersapologetics.com, not to give a shameless self-promoting plug at all. But yeah, that stuff's there. I mentioned earlier that I'm planning on doing an ebook on I Affirm the Virgin Birth, which I do affirm. And I'm going to keep going down the line. One book I am planning on in the future, and hopefully I will do this, is going to be even I Affirm the Rule of Jesus, which would be a preterist eschatology that Jesus Christ is ruling as king right now.
Oh, well, I'll be looking forward to that. Yeah, those are some great books. Some of those, are the ones like I would recommend, like Brian Godawa's End Times Bible Prophecy. It's Not What They Told You, and Hank Hanegraaff's The Apocalypse Code. It was like, it came within a hair's breadth of convincing me. I still had to do a little bit of research before I was totally on board, because it was just like I said, like, woo, drinking from a fire hose. Another book I'd recommend, I know if you would be R.C. Sproul's The Last Days According to Jesus. And I don't know this for sure. You'll have to go check it out for yourself. But I think he has like a course on this on legionnaire.org that's free to listen to. Some of his lectures and series are free, and some of them you have to pay for. I think this might be one of the free ones. I might be wrong, but it kind of follows the template of that book. And if you look into these books and you are convinced, as Nick and I are, that preterism is true, and you're like, oh man, I can't enjoy my Left Behind novels anymore. Hey, have no fear. The Brian Godawa we mentioned, he has written a 4-part novel series called Chronicles of the Apocalypse. That it takes place in the first century. Really good. I love the characters. I love, you know, I just love the whole thing. I love all of Godawa's novels. And his novels are like footnoted too. It's kind of weird to do that in a novel, but with the subject matter, he like shows you the historical and biblical, backup, so you'll know he's not just making stuff up. And I really enjoy I really enjoy the audiobook series because he's a good performer. He really he narrates his novels just really really well. So if you're convinced that preterism is true, and you're like, oh man, Left Behind is not that interesting anymore now that it's now that it's based on total bunk. Hey, there's something to fill the void.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
So
I honestly tried listening to the Left Behind novels on audiobook. I think I could only get through like book 3 or 4. I was like, no, this isn't even good fiction.
yeah, Slaymarin says thanks, great show at Cerebral Faith Video. Well, thank you, and thumbs up. Well, thank you guys for watching Cerebral Faith Live and listening to the Cerebral Faith podcast. If you would like to support this ministry, where I've lost everything. Where is it? I've lost the banners. Okay, here we go. I got disoriented. If you'd like to support this ministry financially, go to www.patreon.com/cerebralfaith. Your patronage is really helpful. It's expensive being a content creator. I pay for a lot of different things. I pay for subscriptions to stock videos places to make some of the uploads that I put up here on the channel. I pay for the website. I pay for StreamYard Premium so we could have this interesting background of the destruction of Jerusalem and the opening and ending, because the free version of StreamYard doesn't give you that. It costs a lot of money to put the best kind of content out there that I possibly can. And if you'd like to become $3, $10, $20, any of those will help, and you'll get some good benefits in return. Early access to videos, early access to blog posts. You'll get all of my books for a lower price than you would have, and on the higher tiers, you'll get audiobooks that you can't get anywhere else. So that will be really nice. And for those of you watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Peace out. God bless. And until next time, keep using the brains that God gave you.